Hello, and welcome to Shadow Me Next, a podcast where I take you into and behind the scenes of the medical world to provide you with a deeper understanding of the human side of medicine. I'm Ashley, a physician assistant, medical editor, clinical preceptor, and the creator of Shadow Me Next. It is my pleasure to introduce you to incredible members of the healthcare field and uncover their unique stories, the joys and challenges they face, and what drives them in their careers. It's access you want and stories you need. Whether you're a pre-health student or simply curious about the healthcare field, I invite you to join me as we take a conversational and personal look into the lives and minds of leaders in medicine. I don't want you to miss a single one of these conversations, so make sure that you subscribe to this podcast, which will automatically notify you when new episodes are dropped, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Shadow Me Next, where we will review highlights from this conversation and where I'll give you sneak previews of our upcoming guests. From Nigeria to the UK to the United States, Dr. Adaka has practiced emergency medicine on 3 continents. In this episode, we trace his fascinating career path from his early aspirations of becoming a surgeon to discovering emergency medicine thanks to a surprising source, the TV show ER. But beyond the geography and accolades, Dr. Adaka shares powerful stories about practicing medicine in vastly different healthcare systems and how those experiences shaped his philosophy of care. We'll explore cost barriers in the United States that echo his time in developing nations, the promise and limitations of AI in medicine, and the surprising ways his faith deepens his commitment to science and healing. Please keep in mind that the content of this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered as professional medical advice. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. This is Shadow Me Next with Dr. Gregory Adaka. Hey, Dr. Adaka, thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to discuss your journey in medicine because it does not only span time, it spans continents.
Thank you very much, Ashley.
You started in the UK and then Nigeria and then the United States.
Well, if you're talking from my life story, yes, started in the UK. I was born in Manchester in the north of England. I left the UK when I was still young. I was 8 to Nigeria because my parents are Nigerian, and they returned to the country as was a trend back in the 1960s and 1970s. They would go to the UK or America to get higher education. The plan being that they go back to Nigeria and land a great job or something like that. But as often happens, they go abroad to study and then start having kids and things like that. And plans all change. Even up until the 80s, there were many Nigerians in the UK or in America, for that matter, who'd been there for more than 10 years and started raising a family. People like me. We later returned with our parents to Nigeria, where essentially I did most of my growing up. I like to tell people I was educated in Nigeria because I got to Nigeria when I was still in elementary school. So all of my education from the elementary through secondary to university level was done in Nigeria. Started to practice medicine there with a heart of returning to the UK. I wanted to be a surgeon at the time. I was in Nigeria for 5 years as a doctor before I went to the UK, where I stumbled upon emergency medicine. That specialty does not exist or did not exist in Nigeria at the time. It was still a relatively new specialty, even in the UK at that time, in the mid-90s.
Wow.
Same in America, as a matter of fact, because the emergency medicine as a field was just a part of somebody else's specialty. I remember in England in the 1970s, it was called casualty. Later changed its name to accident and emergency. That was the name of the specialty and the accidents and emergency department. The ER is a very American expression, the emergency room. And it's a specialty that developed again through the 1970s. And by the 1980s, it had become an arm of surgeons, basically. And that was similarly how it started in the UK, although when it became a Royal College, we were under the auspices of the Royal College of Anaesthetists. And emergency medicine is an offshoot of internal medicine rather than an offshoot of surgery in the UK, which I discovered. My inspiration to become an emergency physician in the UK in the mid-90s was one certain television show that I saw several times, which you may have heard of. It's called ER.
I love it.
And it was quite to my surprise a few years after that, I discovered that what had happened to me was actually a thing. Quite a few medical students were inspired to join the practice of emergency medicine because of the show ER, because back in the 90s, it was very, very popular and was enjoyed by so many people. It was a lot better than, say, General Hospital and the other soap operas of the 1970s and 1980s. It was on another level. Even I, as a doctor, used to watch it and think, this looks pretty good. And I got bit by the ER bug, as I say, and the rest is history.
What is so amazing to me is that you have worked as a doctor on 3 continents. I mean, not just 3 different hospitals, 3 different continents.
I've lost count of the hospitals, to be honest.
I'm sure you have, which is amazing. But what are some, maybe 1 or 2 of the most striking differences that you've noticed, either working for the NHS in the UK, I would imagine, versus healthcare systems in Nigeria, maybe, and the United States?
Okay. The NHS is a National Health Service of England and Wales, and there's a National Health Service of Scotland as well. But the UK, basically, the health system, 90% of the people who receive healthcare in the UK do so through the National Health Service. There is no National Health Service in Nigeria, I can tell you that. And then again, anything I tell you about healthcare in Nigeria is, 30 years old, because I left Nigeria in the mid-90s. So a lot has changed. A lot has changed. A couple of years ago, my uncle had severe kidney failure and was told, my uncle in Nigeria, that is, I got wind that he required a kidney transplant. And I thought, gosh, how are we going to manage that? But the information I was getting from the Nigerian practitioners was as if it was routine. So I had to put my modern Nigeria hat on to recognize the fact that, yes, they do kidney transplants routinely in Nigeria these days, unlike 30 or 40 years ago. So yes, they have come a long way. But I think the distinctive difference between practicing in Nigeria as opposed to practicing in the UK for me was the access to technology and even things like medication. It doesn't matter whether you're in Ghana or Egypt or Guatemala or just name the developing country, Vietnam. The major restriction is just it's cost. The more money you've got, the better access to healthcare you have. Going to the UK, it was very refreshing to be able to practice medicine where you can prescribe a medication. And the issue is, does he care to get it or not? Not a matter of can he afford it. Everybody gets it. You need this treatment. All right, fair enough. And I'll take this days off work or whatnot, but it's not an issue of can he afford it or not. It doesn't matter what the treatment is. And to me, that was just the blessing of living in a Western country where you can practice easy medicine, focus on the diagnosis and on your treatment. And that's all you need to bother about. Of course, the other social determinants of health you need to be concerned about as well. That's for sure. But you don't have the restriction of, if I prescribe this medication for this family, are they going to look at me like I'm crazy, thinking, doctor, we can't afford that, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's the horror of practicing medicine in an undeveloped nation. Coming to the US, I mean, we'd all heard about what America is like. The stereotype is that healthcare is so expensive here, nobody can get stuff like that. That's obviously an exaggeration, right? Because, I mean, I'd come to America several times over the years before we finally moved in 2014. So I was familiar with the system to a good extent. But it did strike me that there are some similarities, and this is shocking, between my practice of medicine in Nigeria and my practice of medicine in the US.
Wow.
Yes. Shortly after I got here, I was working in New Hampshire in an ER department. I'd probably been working for about a month or a month and a half. I remember this story vividly. A young woman came into the ER and she had some sort of ear pain, I believe it was, or sinus infection. Either way, I prescribed Augmentin, Coamoxiclav, as an antibiotic, 10-day prescription. Here you go. After I'd finished dealing with the case, gave her paperwork and all, she left. Then about half an hour later, I got a call from the receptionist who said, Dr. Adaka, there's a call for you from the pharmacy. I said, which pharmacy? The hospital pharmacy? He said, no, the pharmacy just down the street. I said, that was odd. I've never got a call from a pharmacy before practicing in England. So I picked up the phone. Chap says, you Dr. Adaka? I said, yes, I am. Well, there's this young lady who's in here, you prescribed augmentin for her and she can't afford it. And that was a rude shock to me. I thought,
Wow.
this is America, right? I mean, I prescribed the augmentin, it's what she needs. What else can you give her? What else can I give her? That's the appropriate antibiotic for the infection I believe that she has.
Mm-hmm.
Said, well, she said you can't afford it's $80-something. Why was it so expensive in the first place? Said he could do some sort of discount to $60 or so, but she doesn't have that kind of a job. She's younger. She can't afford it. I said, all right, how about Keflex? And he said, okay, we can try that. And said it was much cheaper. And I thought, this is a compromise because I didn't feel that it was an appropriate antibiotic with enough spectrum of activity or this coverage that would not be resisted by the organisms that she probably had. But what could I do? So I prescribed the Keflex. And then I hung up and I turned to the nurse who was standing by me and I said, I've not practiced medicine like that since I left Nigeria. She looked at me a bit astounded. But yes, that was my sort of wake-up call of there is a similarity with all the technology and all that we have. And believe you me, the most cutting-edge technology in healthcare and science comes from this country. I can say that proudly because I'm an American now. Right. So yes, it is true, but it's unfortunate that it's just not as available to everyone as other Western countries have managed to make the same technology available to their own people.
That's such a good point. And, honestly, I don't know what's better. I mean, they're just, you almost can't compare them, apples and oranges. Do we want cutting edge technology, but leaving people in the dust when we do it? Or do we want maybe not the most cutting edge stuff and protect all people, and give people the antibiotics that they need? That's a hard one.
If we take the first option, manage with reasonable technology and everybody gets it, that sounds like the horrible term I've heard a lot dating back to the 1980s. But in fact, I think it goes back further than that, and that's socialized medicine. I don't approve of the term, nor do I approve of the practice. It does exist, obviously, in some communist countries, but that's not what you have in other Western nations, although that's the label they've often got from this side of the pond. The reality is that not all, but most of the cutting-edge technology and medications come from the United States. That's true, but not all of it. Every now and then you run across stuff that was invented in Japan or Germany, or the test tube baby in vitro fertilization was first successful in the UK. Western nations have, let me say, wealthy, advanced nations have one thing in common, and that's that they tend to lead the world when it comes to breakthroughs in technology. The United States leads the leaders. You know what I mean? Whatever we get here, whether it's an MRI or nuclear scan or some latest robotic surgery, whatever we get here eventually gets over there, whether that be Japan or Australia or Sweden or Finland. Everybody gets it, and very quickly. The difference is when these other countries get hold of this technology or these latest new drugs, they get it, and everybody in their country has access to it. Whereas it was invented here, and here where it came from, not everybody has got access to it. It's frustrating, but it's the world we live in. So that hopefully answers the question. We don't need to have a world in this country, certainly not in this country or any other wealthy country, where healthcare is rationed, and it doesn't exist in wealthy nations. They all have the best technology available because just like everybody's got an iPhone, everybody's got a computer on their desktop, and everybody takes a lot of the technology for granted in wealthy Western nations. The same thing with our healthcare. But it's just that it's free and available over there and maybe a lot more expensive over here.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And Dr. Adaka, it brings up a really good question because, I'm sure there is a person listening that says he's so impressive. He's practiced medicine on 3 continents. He understands medicine in a number of different countries, but why does that matter to me as a pre-health student in the United States? Maybe I'm not going to go practice in the UK or in Nigeria. And as a PA, which is what I am, there might not even be a PA profession in some of these countries. So I guess the question for some of these pre-health students would be, I'm in America. Why does it impact me what other countries are doing? And I think it's a good question, but I know you have a great answer to this.
I admire your faith in me.
Isn't he great? Well, Dr. Adaka and I did not have the opportunity to discuss a quality question, but at this point, it brings up an absolutely fabulous interview question that I could see you hearing at some point on your interview journey. The question would be, why does it impact me what other countries are doing with their healthcare systems? So as you'll find, Dr. Adaka emphasizes the importance of perspective, understanding global systems and how it gives us depth, almost like binocular vision in the brain. Without it, our view of healthcare falls flat. So why should a pre-health student care about how medicine works in the UK or Nigeria? You may never practice there, but the answer is perspective. Knowing how others solve the same problem can shape how you lead, what you question, and how boldly you advocate for change. Listen in to how Dr. Adaka beautifully explains this concept. Keep in mind that there's more interview prep, such as mock interviews and personal statement review, over on shadowmenext.com. There you'll find amazing resources to help you as you prepare to answer your own quality questions.
Well, I would say the importance of it, as is the case in many other things in life, is perspective. You get a better perspective on your own reality if you can see the reality in many other different places. The eye, for example, all animals that have got two eyes on the front of their heads, whether you be an owl or a human being or a monkey, or even a dog, they've all got two eyes on the front of their head, even though they're slightly off to one side, unlike most birds that have an eye on either side. Now, what the birds have is a very wide vision that goes almost 300 some degrees, but they have very narrow binocular vision where both eyes can see the same part of the visual field. Animals that have got binocular vision, both your eyes are pointing roughly in the same direction, are seeing two images of two visions of the same image, slightly different. And what that enables us to do is to determine depth of field. That gives us 3D vision. And we take it for granted. But if you lose one eye, you close one eye, you suddenly realize you can no longer assess depth. Get better depth in your understanding of many things in life, and in particular, in your understanding of medicine and healthcare is improved if you go to other places and see how they do it. I believe one of the reasons why we struggle here in our country, and I mean, when I say our country, I mean the United States, about improving our healthcare system is because we're so very insular. So we don't see how it's done elsewhere. And so we run with the impression that we're doing our best here. We're the wealthiest country in the world. We have most of the cutting edge technology is invented here. For sure, we have the best healthcare, even though we struggle. Well, it can't be better anywhere else, can it? And if you don't go anywhere else, then you'll never know. Even if you're a doctor and you don't see any reason why you're going to leave your family and go to some other country and practice medicine in Sweden, be aware of what healthcare is like in these other nations. I did a course in comparative healthcare when I was in Cornell doing my master's in healthcare administration. It was very eye-opening. I was aware of a lot of it before, but it really honed my skills in the area of comparative medicine and showed me a whole lot. So I would advise anybody else, you don't have to go to another country, but find out how other healthcare systems work so you can compare it with your own. When you're in a position to make changes, and you'd be surprised at how many people listening to your podcast will be at some point in a position to make some changes, what to do, and not just believe anything you hear off the internet about what life is like in these other nations, especially as pertains to healthcare.
As expected, an absolutely fabulous, fabulous answer, and not one that just applies to medicine. You know, this is such an important point, and it's something that I think we are losing so much of, is the ability to converse. And conversing does not necessarily mean you and I are agreeing on the things we're talking about. We can have very different opinions, and those different opinions and the different ways that we approach things, if we listen and if we understand, then we can both get better, or at least have a deeper understanding of those differences. And that's not just in medicine, although I think we could make such major improvements. And I was just speaking with, it's so interesting. I was just speaking with a anesthesiologist assistant. So PAs but for anesthesia. She was telling me about the way they are educated, and it is so different than the way we're educated. And yet we have a similar role in the healthcare team, just different fields. I was listening to it, just thinking at first it seemed so foreign. And then, of course, as she was talking about it, I thought, we could really improve. If we just took a little bit of this with our PA education, it could be so much better. Which, of course, this might be a good segue to talking a little bit about AI in healthcare, because I think you have seen so much change over the course of your time in medicine and your geographic location in medicine. You've seen major improvements. I think AI, it's here to stay.
It's here to stay.
But is AI in healthcare, do you think, in your opinion, is it more likely to empower clinicians or replace them?
I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't see that far out. When I say that far out, I mean, say, a couple of generations from now. I can't tell. But I can say, at least in the short run, the next 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years or more, AI is going to vastly improve, or certainly in the next 10 years, vastly improve the way in which we perform our duties in healthcare. It's going to augment. It cannot replace, certainly in most fields, cannot replace, but it will certainly augment. I do see a day in, I don't know, maybe the not too distant future, where you would be able to replace a surgeon with a robot. After all, we use robots in surgery now, but it's controlled by the hands of the surgeon.
Right.
If we have a level of, I hate to use the word intelligence because robots don't really have intelligence, but a level of AI that can do what a surgeon can do and think the way a surgeon can think, my goodness, I think it will be possible in 20 or 30 years' time where a robot will do an appendectomy on its own without needing a human being. I think it's certainly possible. Well, we haven't got over autonomous driving yet, so we're still on our way. The surgeon cuts the wrong blood vessel, and there'll always have to be some sort of backup if the robot does the wrong thing for a human being to take over and say, no, like this instead. But certainly, I think in the short term, there are many ways in which AI can augment our practice. A few years ago, when I first heard, I think I was still in New Hampshire then, this would have been in 2014, 2015, thereabouts, heard about how computers were able to read CT scans and x-rays and give, in some instances, a more accurate diagnosis than a human radiologist. I thought, gosh, and that was, 10 years ago. We've come a long way since then. Right now, don't quote me, but I believe that AI reading of most radiographs and CT scans is more accurate than the human being. It doesn't make human error mistakes, bias or seeing things that are not supposed to be there, but you think they're there. So I can see, unfortunately, radiologists being the first to be replaced by software, even pathologists reading slides, making decisions about. And I think even certainly in the short term, you will still need to have a human being that vets these cases and says yay or nay at some point. But those are the ways in which I believe AI can actually help us to become better and do things faster, where one doctor can be 10 doctors because he's got software systems doing what he can't do or can do, but they can do it a lot faster. Because AI is good for mundane tasks that normally bore human beings who can get mentally fatigued and begin to create and make errors. The machine doesn't get tired and just goes on and on. So I believe, yes, it'll augment our practice, but it won't replace us, at least not yet.
Not yet. That's exactly right. First of all, thank you for such a hopeful take on AI. It is nice.
For our lifetime, right? I don't know about my kids' lifetime. It's different, but
at least for us right now. Before I wrap up, we've talked about our robots now, which is always fun. You are a man of faith. And I think that it's so interesting to jump from robots and artificial intelligence in medicine and then kind of shift it and turn it on its head and talk a little bit about faith in medicine. And I guess the easiest question here is, how can someone who's so committed to the scientific method also maintain a deep religious faith? And how does that, for you, how does that translate on the day-to-day?
Well, you've asked an interesting question. I'll tackle the first part of the question. How am I able to marry my faith with my commitment to the scientific method? And then I'll talk about how it impacts my day-to-day. People who are not of a religious faith understand that although one may have a religious faith, that doesn't mean that they walk blind into things. faith is not simply a lack of evidence and you just trust that something is the way it is because you believe it's that way. There has to be evidence behind it. This means that we all have faith. Even an atheist has faith because you believe in certain things where the evidence is not 100%. There may be those who would argue that the scientific method requires that we take 100% of evidence and that's all. The reality is it's never 100%. I can't say that if I stood up from this chair and I sat down again, that the chair would still be there. There could be some quantum hole in physics somewhere that enables the chair to disappear, but it never happens because it's only a 1 in a 10 trillion chance possibility that could happen and a space-time wormhole would open up. But if it did happen, I would be shocked because I believe and I trusted that the chair would be there. How did I believe the chair would be there? Because at my age, I have lived my life knowing that when you get up from a chair, if nobody touches it, when you sit down, it'll still be there. Now, that might be different if I was a year-old or a toddler, but at this age, I've taken these things for granted. So that's the faith that I have. This is how things happen. I know that when I wake up in the morning, the sun is going to rise and in the evening it's going to set. If some astrophysicist told me that that's not going to happen tomorrow, I would need more evidence. The point is that you can't know everything 100%. There's always a gap of information because no knowledge is perfect. That gap is your trust in that which the evidence has led you to the edge, and the last bit is bridged by faith. Now, if that faith is a religious faith, it's exactly the same thing. I don't simply believe in God because, the Bible tells me. I've got enough evidence that I have seen that makes me believe there is a God out there, if you know what I mean. And for all those who do have a religious conviction, I believe they see the same thing. And if you don't have a religious conviction, then you are still operating in faith because the evidence cannot disprove the existence of God or the supernatural. I'm not an astrophysicist and I will not step into territory and argue on that point, but I believe there's enough information which I first began to hear about back in the early 80s. They were talking about the Big Bang and how they'd gotten to within fractions of a second of the occurrence of the Big Bang, describing what would have happened. Now, I know a lot more about it than I did back then. And yes, physicists have gotten in their investigations to that close to when the Big Bang happened. But you can't go to the moment of the Big Bang with any sort of investigation because that's the limit of physics. Space and time, the episode we now refer to, the huge expansion of the singularity that occurred 13 billion years ago that we refer to as the Big Bang. But what happened before then? Silly question. There can't be a before because there was no time. All right, so why did the singularity explode in the Big Bang? We don't know. Can we ever find out? The simple answer is no, because that's beyond physics. So is there an existence beyond the singularity? There is. And human beings for 100,000 years have always felt that there's something else out there, and we keep thinking that science will, back in the Enlightenment days, they felt that science will eliminate that altogether, and science will eat everything, and everything before the Enlightenment was just simply superstition. The reality is that science has led us to the edge of the cliff and has shown us, yes, there is that which exists beyond the singularity, and it cannot be investigated by physics. That is where my mind is when it comes to things of faith or the supernatural. There's a lot more to it than that, of course, but that is, to me, foundational. There's a couple of people I admire, like Dr. Francis Collins, who led the team that finally decoded the human genome, for which they won the Nobel Prize. He is a man of faith, and when he led the NIH, he led the NIH for years, one of the questions that many asked him at the time was, how can you, a man of faith, lead a scientific institution of this sort of repute? And he was able to defend himself adequately, and he was given the position. And as I said, he led the NIH. I think he just retired from the NIH a couple of years ago, but yet he's a man of faith. And those are the sort of people that I admire, that have a faith and understand that it does not prevent them from investigating science. In fact, my belief in God enables me to pursue science even further, because I believe there's so much that that supreme being has put in place and given us mere mortals a glimpse of, and the excitement is discovering more and more of what that supernatural being whom we call God has put in place in the existence that we are living in.
And it sounds like that's what translates into your life in medicine.
It does. I try to live my life according to the dictates, not by my own strength, but an inner strength that comes from knowing God. I often fall short of that, and some of my patients will tell you that, especially in the ER. But yes, I do my best.
I think it's fabulous. Dr. Adaka, you are incredible. I am so grateful to have been able to talk to you today. Your love for this career is tangible, and you've seen it. You've seen it and the people in it at its best and also on days at its worst. So thank you for persevering. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you so much for joining us today on Shadow Me Next. I'm so grateful.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Appreciate that.
Thank you so very much for listening to this episode of Shadow Me Next. If you liked this episode, or if you think it could be useful for a friend, please subscribe and invite them to join us next Monday. As always, if you have any questions, let me know on Facebook or Instagram. Access you want, stories you need. You're always invited to Shadow Me Next.